Business Proposal. Part 1. The Blind Date. Katherine Song stood in front of her closet, getting more and more frustrated. She was looking for the right clothes. Her best friend, Olivia Park, had asked her to do something unusual. Olivia had asked Katherine to go on a blind date in her place. Katherine had never thought she would do this. She held up a dress and looked at herself in the mirror. It has to be crazy enough to get rejected, Katherine said to herself, remembering Olivia's instructions. But not so crazy that I look completely insane. Olivia had begged her, saying her father had arranged the date and she couldn't disappoint him by not going. Katherine, always the reliable friend, had reluctantly agreed. Olivia's plan was simple. Katherine was supposed to act strange enough to scare off the man. After a lot of thinking, she finally chose a bright, floral dress that was very different from her usual style. She wore mismatched accessories and a big hat. Happy with her look, Katherine left for the fancy restaurant where the date was. The restaurant was very luxurious. Katherine felt a bit nervous as she walked inside, looking for her date. She saw him quickly, a tall, handsome man in a sharp suit, sitting at a corner table. He looked very confident. Taking a deep breath, Katherine walked over to him, her heart beating fast. When she got closer, he stood up and extended his hand. "Katherine," he asked, his voice smooth and confident. "Yes, that's me," she replied, shaking his hand. "And you must be?" "David Kim," he said, smiling a little. "Nice to meet you." David Kim. The name sounded familiar, but Katherine couldn't remember why. She sat down, reminding herself of Olivia's instructions. She needed to act weird enough to get rejected. David seemed unfazed by her strange outfit. He was polite, asking about her interests and hobbies. Katherine found it hard to stay on course with her plan. She talked about bizarre and random topics, but David just nodded, sometimes raising an eyebrow but never showing any signs of discomfort. As the date went on, Katherine's anxiety grew. Nothing she said seemed to bother him. She excused herself to the restroom and pulled out her phone to text Olivia. "This guy is impossible to shake off." "Nothing works," Olivia replied. "Keep trying. He's got to reject you eventually." With a sigh, Katherine returned to the table, only to find David engrossed in his phone. When he saw her, he put it away and gave her his full attention again. She was about to start another odd story when he interrupted her. "Katherine," he began seriously, "I have a proposition for you." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. Did he know she wasn't Olivia? "I need you to marry me." Katherine blinked, sure she had misheard him. "Excuse me." David leaned forward, looking earnest. "I know this is sudden, but hear me out. My grandfather has been pressuring me to settle down and get married. I've been going on these blind dates to humor him, but it's getting unbearable. If I tell him I'm engaged, he'll back off." Katherine stared at him, her mind racing. This was not going according to plan. "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé?" "Exactly," David confirmed. "I'll pay you well for your time. 800,001 per date." Katherine's eyes widened at the amount. It was a tempting offer, especially since her family had money problems. This money could help them a lot, but still, it was a crazy idea. "And what happens after your grandfather believes we're engaged?" she asked. "We can say we broke it off after a while." No harm done, David replied smoothly. Katherine bit her lip, thinking she needed the money, but the whole situation felt unreal. However, looking at David's sincere expression, she found herself nodding slowly. "All right, I'll do it," she said, surprising herself. "But I have a condition. Name it," David said. "You need to help me create a believable background. If your grandfather is as sharp as you say, he'll see right through any inconsistencies," Katherine explained. David nodded, smiling. "Deal. I'll have my secretary, Jake, help with the details." And so their unlikely partnership began. Katherine spent the next few days working with Jake, David's efficient and somewhat aloof secretary, to create her new identity. She became Katherine Lee, a successful businesswoman. They practiced her backstory carefully, making sure she could answer any potential questions without hesitation. Their first official date was a dinner with David's grandfather, Chairman Edward Kim. Katherine felt nervous as they arrived at the Kim mansion, a big estate that showed wealth and power. David squeezed her hand reassuringly before they went in. Chairman Kim was an imposing figure with sharp eyes. He welcomed them with a warm smile, but Katherine could sense his sharpness. As the evening went on, she started to relax a bit, getting into the role they had practiced. "So, Katherine," Chairman Kim said, looking at her closely, "tell me about your family." Katherine took a deep breath and started the story they had made up. "My parents run a small business. They've always supported my ambitions. I have an older brother who's a doctor." Chairman Kim nodded, seeming satisfied with her answers. Katherine glanced at David, who gave her an approving nod. The dinner went smoothly, and by the end, Chairman Kim seemed convinced. As they left the mansion, Katherine let out a sigh of relief. "That went better than I expected," she admitted. David smiled. "You did great." "My grandfather likes you." Katherine felt proud. Maybe this crazy plan could actually work. Over the next few weeks, they continued their charade, going to events and spending time together. Despite the initial awkwardness, Katherine found herself enjoying David's company. He was kind and considerate, and she saw a different side of him than the stern as she had imagined. But as their fake relationship deepened, Katherine began to worry. She had to constantly remind herself that this was just an arrangement. David didn't really love her, and she couldn't afford to fall for him. Yet, with each passing day, it became harder to ignore her growing feelings for him. One evening, after a particularly successful event, they sat in David's car, parked outside Katherine's apartment. There was a comfortable silence between them, and Katherine felt a strange mix of happiness and sadness. "David," she began hesitantly, "what happens if your grandfather finds out the truth?" David turned to her, his expression serious. "He won't. We've been careful. But if he does?" Katherine pressed, needing to hear his answer. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If he does, we'll deal with it then. For now, let's just focus on making this work." Katherine nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She knew their arrangement couldn't last forever, and when it ended, she would have to face her own feelings. But for now, she pushed those thoughts aside, determined to enjoy the moments they had together, even if they were built on a lie. Unbeknownst to her, Olivia was dealing with her own set of problems. After moving out of her father's house to escape the relentless blind dates, she had found herself living next door to Jake, David's secretary. Their first encounter had been far from pleasant, involving a rogue cockroach and a lot of screaming. But despite their rocky start, Olivia found herself drawn to him. Jake, on the other hand, was not pleased. He blamed Olivia for dragging Katherine into this mess and tried his best to avoid her. However, they kept running into each other. Whether it was in the hallway, the elevator, or at the local convenience store, they seemed destined to meet. One evening, as Olivia struggled to carry her groceries, Jake appeared out of nowhere, offering his help. Despite his earlier aloofness, he couldn't deny his growing attraction to her. As they walked to her apartment, Olivia couldn't help but tease him. Finally decided to be neighborly, she joked. Jake rolled his eyes but couldn't hide his smile. Just being helpful, don't read too much into it. Olivia laughed, a sound that made Jake's heart skip a beat. He knew he was falling for her, but he couldn't ignore the problems their relationship would bring. For now, he decided to take things one step at a time, just like Katherine and David. Little did they know, their lives were about to become even more intertwined in ways they couldn't have imagined. Part 2: Unraveling Secrets. Weeks passed, and Katherine and David's fake relationship continued to grow. Chairman Edward Kim believed their engagement more with each meeting, and Katherine got better at pretending. But the more time she spent with David, the harder it was to hide her real feelings.
One day, David invited Katherine to a family gathering at a fancy resort outside the city. This event was important, and Katherine knew she had to impress the Kim family. She wore a simple, elegant dress, trying to look both sophisticated and subtle.
When they arrived at the resort, David held her hand and said, "You'll be fine." "Just remember our story." Katherine nodded, trying to calm her nerves. The gathering was grand, with well-dressed guests talking and laughing. David introduced her to many family members, and each conversation tested her ability to keep her act together. Katherine felt more comfortable as she talked to different relatives who seemed genuinely interested in her and David's relationship. But one person, Isabella Kim, David's cousin, was not convinced. She watched Katherine closely and finally confronted her when they were alone. "So, Katherine," Isabella said casually, but with sharp eyes, "how did you and David meet again?" Katherine repeated the story they had practiced. "We met at a charity event. He was there for Go Food, and I was volunteering." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Interesting? David never mentioned you before this. It's just ... unusual for him to keep someone he's serious about a secret." Katherine forced a smile, feeling nervous. "David is a private person. We wanted to keep our relationship quiet until we were sure about each other." Isabella nodded slowly but still seemed doubtful. "Well, I hope you make him happy. He deserves it." Isabella walked away, leaving Katherine uneasy. She knew Isabella didn't believe their story, which was a big problem. She found David and told him her concerns. "Isabella doesn't believe us," Katherine whispered. "She's going to dig deeper." David looked worried. "Isabella is very perceptive. We need to be extra careful around her, but don't worry, we'll handle it." Katherine nodded, but the fear remained. She felt their lie was about to be exposed. Meanwhile, Olivia was having her own problems. Living next to Jake, David's secretary, was both good and bad. Despite his initial coldness, Olivia had become friends with Jake, but she couldn't ignore her growing attraction to him. One evening, Olivia came home from work and found Jake sitting on the stairs. He looked up and gave her a tired smile. "Long day?" she asked, sitting down beside him. Jake nodded. "Yeah, dealing with David's fake engagement is exhausting."
Olivia winced. "Sorry about that. I never meant for things to get so complicated." Jake sighed. "It's not your fault. We all got dragged into this mess. But seeing you every day has been ... unexpected." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "Unexpected how?"
Jake looked at her, his eyes softening. "I never thought I'd develop feelings for someone in the middle of all this chaos. But here we are." Olivia smiled, feeling warm inside. "I feel the same way. Maybe we can handle this chaos together." Jake chuckled. "I'd like that." As they sat together, Olivia felt hopeful about their budding relationship. But she knew they had to be careful, especially with Katherine and David's situation becoming more difficult. Back at the resort, the evening was ending, and David and Katherine were getting ready to leave. As they said goodbye, Chairman Kim pulled David aside, looking serious. "David, a word," he said, motioning for David to follow him. Katherine watched them go, her heart pounding. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw the tension in David's posture. When he returned, he looked troubled. "What did he say?" Katherine asked anxiously. David sighed. "He's planning a big family dinner next week and expects us to announce our engagement officially." Katherine's eyes widened. "Officially? But we're not actually engaged." "I know," David said, running a hand through his hair, "but we don't have a choice. If we back out now, my grandfather will know something's wrong." Katherine felt panic. "What are we going to do?" "We'll have to go through with it," David said, determined. "Just for a little while longer," Katherine nodded, feeling dread. Their web of lies was getting more tangled, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it all fell apart. The next week was a whirlwind of preparations for the family dinner. Katherine was busy with activities, from picking out an engagement ring to rehearsing their announcement. David was supportive, but Katherine saw the strain in his eyes. Finally, the evening of the dinner arrived. The Kim mansion was lively as family members gathered for the big event. Katherine felt a knot of anxiety as she and David walked to the dining room. Hand in hand, Chairman Kim greeted them warmly, his eyes twinkling. "David, Katherine, welcome. We are all looking forward to your announcement."
Katherine forced a smile, trying to steady her nerves. They sat at the long dining table, surrounded by curious relatives. Isabella sat across from them, watching closely. As dinner went on, Katherine found it hard to stay calm. Finally, Chairman Kim stood up and tapped his glass to get everyone's attention.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he began, commanding the room, "I have an announcement. My grandson David and his fiancée Katherine have something to share." All eyes turned to David and Katherine. David stood up, pulling Katherine up with him. He took a deep breath and looked at her before addressing the room. "Thank you, grandfather," David began. "Katherine and I are thrilled to announce our engagement. We've been looking forward to sharing this moment with all of you." Katherine nodded, managing a smile despite her nerves. The room erupted in applause and congratulations, but she couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. As they sat down, Isabella leaned over, her eyes glinting with suspicion. "Congratulations, you two. I hope you're ready for married life." Katherine forced another smile, her heart pounding. She knew Isabella was onto them, and it was only a matter of time before their secret was exposed. As the evening ended, Katherine and David found a moment alone in the garden. The night air was cool, and the stars shone brightly. Katherine looked at David, serious. "David, we can't keep this up forever," she said quietly. "What are we going to do?" David sighed, pulling her into a hug. "I don't know, Katherine. But whatever happens, we'll face it together." Katherine nodded, resting her head against his chest. She knew their time was running out, but for now, she took comfort in his embrace, hoping they could find a way out of the tangled web they had created. Part 3: Confrontation and Resolution. The days after the engagement announcement were tense. Katherine and David tried to keep up their act, but it was getting harder. Katherine was always worried that Isabella or someone else would find out the truth. David was becoming more distant, busy with work and the pressure of their secret. They saw each other less, except when they had to appear in public together. One evening, Katherine got an urgent call from Olivia. "Katherine, we need to talk. Can you come over?" Katherine agreed and went to Olivia's apartment. When she arrived, she saw that Olivia looked very serious and almost panicked. "What's going on?" Katherine asked, feeling anxious. Olivia took a deep breath. "Isabella came to see me today." Katherine's heart sank. What did she say? "She knows, Katherine. She knows everything," Olivia said, her voice shaking. "She figured out that you're not who you say you are." Katherine felt a wave of panic. What are we going to do? "She's planning to confront David and his grandfather," Olivia said. "We need to tell David before she does." "Maybe we can come up with a plan." Katherine nodded, trying to calm down. "I'll go see him now." As Katherine rushed to David's office, her mind was racing. She knew there was no easy way out, but she hoped they could limit the damage. When she arrived at the office, she found David talking with Jake. Both men looked up as she entered, and she could see the worrying in David's eyes. "Katherine, what's wrong?" he asked, standing up. "We have a problem," Katherine said, taking a deep breath. "Isabella knows the truth. She's planning to confront you and your grandfather." David's expression hardened. How did she find out?
She spoke to Olivia. "She's figured out that I'm not really Katherine Lee," Katherine explained. David cursed softly, running a hand through his hair. "We need to act fast. If my grandfather finds out from her, it will be bad." Jake nodded. "We need to get ahead of this. Tell him ourselves before she can."
Katherine felt scared. What if he doesn't forgive us? David looked at her, determined. "We'll deal with it together." That night, David called a family meeting at the Kim mansion. Katherine felt very anxious as they walked into the grand living room where Chairman Kim, Isabella, and a few other family members were already gathered. David took a deep breath, holding Katherine's hand tightly. "Grandfather, we need to talk." Chairman Kim looked at them curiously. "What's going on, David?" David glanced at Katherine, then back at his grandfather. "There's something we need to tell you. Katherine and we haven't been entirely honest." Isabella, who had been watching silently, spoke up. "I knew it. This whole engagement is a sham, isn't it?" Chairman Kim's eyes widened. "What is she talking about, David?" David took a deep breath. "It started as a way to get you off my back about the blind dates." Katherine agreed to pretend to be my fiancée to help me out, but things got out of hand. Chairman Kim looked shocked, his face turning pale. You lied to me. Katherine stepped forward, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, Chairman Kim. It was my idea to keep the ruse going. David only did it because I needed the money to help my family. I never meant for it to go this far. The room fell silent. Chairman Kim's eyes were filled with disappointment as he looked at David and Katherine. I trusted you both. David took a step closer to his grandfather. I know we betrayed that trust, and I'm sorry. But despite how it started, my feelings for Katherine are real. I love her. Katherine's heart skipped a beat at his words. She looked at David, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. I love you too, she whispered. Chairman Kim sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. This is a lot to take in, but I can see that you're both sincere. However, there will be consequences for your actions. David nodded. We understand, and we're prepared to face them. Isabella, who had been watching the exchange with mixed emotions, stepped forward. Grandfather, if I may, David and Katherine did wrong, but they did it out of love and desperation. Perhaps we can find a way to move forward without causing more harm. Chairman Kim nodded slowly, his gaze softening. You're right, Isabella. We need to find a way to heal from this. David, you'll need to rebuild my trust, and Katherine, you're welcome to stay, but under honest circumstances this time. Relief washed over Katherine. Thank you, Chairman Kim. We won't let you down. As the family began to leave, David pulled Katherine into a tight hug. We did it. We got through it. Katherine smiled, tears of relief in her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. Meanwhile, Olivia and Jake had been listening to the confrontation from outside the room. When it was over, they shared a relieved look. I'm glad it worked out, Olivia said, squeezing Jake's hand. Jake nodded, pulling her close. Me too. And now we can focus on us. Olivia smiled, feeling at peace. Despite the chaos and lies, they had all come out stronger. Over the next few weeks, life began to return to normal. Katherine and David worked on rebuilding trust with his family, while Olivia and Jake explored their new relationship.
There were still challenges ahead, but they faced them together, stronger for the trials they had endured. One evening, as Katherine and David sat on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset, Katherine felt content. Do you think we'll ever look back on this and laugh? She asked, leaning against David.
David chuckled, maybe, but right now, I'm just grateful we made it through. Katherine smiled, feeling his arms wrap around her. Me too, and I wouldn't change a thing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat in comfortable silence, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Subscribe to the channel if you like this story. Also, watch other stories on my channel. The link to the playlist with stories is in the description.